Hello, and welcome everyone to the Kink Perspective. My name is Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. I've been involved with the BDSM and lifestyle community since the late 1990s. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to looking at the BDSM lifestyle and how psychology is interconnected. Sometimes I will review relevant research, look at the day to day interactions on the community, relevant issues plaguing the community, and so much more. In the coming weeks, I'll have different guests on the show that play a major part in their communities and lend their knowledge and expertise to the online communities such as FetLife, covering topics such as the leather community, polyamory, sadism, masochism, dominance, submission, their perspectives as time moves forward. This week, I'm diving into the topic of BDSM principles. For many of us, BDSM conjures up many images in our minds of what is and is not BDSM. For many, in images of chains, whips, a movie that shall not be named, and sometimes imagery of abuse tend to permeate people's minds. BDSM is far more than that. BDSM encompasses a spiritual and mindfulness practice steeped in rituals and rules. Unpacking and understanding this leads us to a better understanding of the lifestyle and what it means to practice it. First, we have to acknowledge that there are no set rules, more like useful guidelines passed down through story and structure built over time. If you've ever attended a function, such as a munch, which is a get-together for kinky people in a non-kink atmosphere, to talk and get to know one another, or go to a private or public play party, you begin to hear stories about these different structures, these rules, protocols that different people use in their relationship dynamics. Let's break down the acronym of BDSM to give further context and then look at some of these core principles that lie within the lifestyle community that generally everyone adheres to. The B stands for bondage, types of restraints, whether they're physical, emotional, mental, that have been agreed to amongst the parties involved. The D stands for dominance or dominant, the person in charge of the dynamic or the person in control. The S can have different connotations, one being for submissive or slave, the person whom freely gives up control to the dominant. It also may stand for a sadomasochist, a person who enjoys and achieves gratification for inflicting pain upon another. Finally, the M. This can stand for a masochist, a person who achieves gratification and enjoys in receiving pain. This pain can come in many forms, by the way, such as emotional, degradation, being talked to or verbally abused, physical, such as being spanked or paddled, or mentally, such as would take place during an interrogation scene. While we have a basic understanding of the terminology, not all of us agree what each letter stands for, let alone represents to them in the community on a larger scale. The basic principles that most learn and eventually evolve to fit into their dynamics are not unlike that of a regular or a vanilla type relationship. We start with the premise of communication. Nothing starts without a conversation first. From there, we begin to learn about one another, not just the kinky stuff, the good stuff, those picadillos, like what they enjoy about the community, what brought them to the kink world, what are their expectations about getting involved, how long have they been involved in the community, do they have a family, what are their hopes and aspirations, and so much more. This phase, at least personally, is something that can go on for months. It shouldn't be rushed because you begin to miss out on some of those fundamental relationship building qualities that can set the stage for a good dynamic. Next comes consent. It is the core principle within the BDSM community. Nothing is expected before anything begins. You don't know what your partner enjoys. You don't presuppose to know. You don't know what they do enjoy, what they don't enjoy, their sexual proclivities, what does or doesn't turn them on, what reservations they may have or may not have. When you're in the communication phase, consent becomes the gateway and conversation that allows a dynamic to set the stage for what is going to transpire within it. It's always evolving because relationships become their own organism, growing and evolving over time. We have to understand that we negotiate everything we do to consent to things we want to do, which is not to say that either party cannot opt out. There are varying degrees of consent within the community, culminating on final negotiations between two people or more. The reason negotiations and preparations are done ahead of time, because if we have to consent in the instant for each act that have already been agreed upon, it ruins that moment in memory. It would slow the pace, so we do the best we can do beforehand to set the mood. From there, we begin to move towards trust. Like other relationships, we are forging ahead with the intimate details of some of our darkest sexual fantasies. If you compare that to a normal or vanilla relationship, that's something that can take 6 months, maybe years to come out, if ever. Within the BDSM community, though, it is out. You're not chastised for it. It is a commonality and bond forged with others over shared tastes and experiences. This, coupled with evolving what we've learned, growing our dynamics and building our trust, and honing our craft together, we can grow the trust we have in our dynamics to make them even stronger. Communication and consent walk hand in hand and come far ahead of time, before sexual acts even take place. And I'm not just talking about intercourse, those intimate and overtly sexual acts that draw in those to find that sexual liberation within the lifestyle. You should be checking in with your partner during a negotiated scene or a play. It's the right thing to do. It's for the most part, though, the consent decree has already been stated, and you know that the trust you have built allows more autonomy for the person you're with, either in control or submitting that control to you to proceed with the pre agreed to activities for that evening. We have to consider our own personal preferences when we decide to get involved within the lifestyle. We have to learn to be able to communicate our own needs, desires, and expressions to a partner, and within the BDSM community it can be easier to do so. When I've talked with clients before, I've asked them what do they enjoy sexually. I sometimes get a puzzled look in return. It's because for the most part, people don't really think about what they like or have had much experience with it. It's about creating a dialogue with ourselves first, and understanding if you want someone to be soft, easy, tender, someone else's definition may be different. To understand what we want out of our partner, we first have to consider our own sexuality. We have to recognize there's no way to communicate effectively, give consent, build trust, or participate in BDSM activities if you don't understand yourself first. This is only brought on through self-awareness. As we start to look at some of the final principles, I would be remiss if I did not bring up respect. There is no such thing as a no-limit relationship or dynamic. Practically, there are some things people cannot physically do, mentally or emotionally, let alone acts that are criminal or you believe to be immoral and wrong. Respecting someone for their own autonomy can, over time, increase your limitations within the dynamic, because you have put in the time to build that trust, to work on your dynamic, to communicate and figure out your consent boundaries, respecting that person's boundaries, and most importantly, doing so without any judgment. You can and should revisit limitations every so often, maybe every 3 to 6 months. A check-in to see if your partner's tastes have changed and if they want to explore more or they're just comfortable where they are. Sometimes you have to test those limitations, but respect the lines that you are working within. Sometimes we come to the realization things need to end, so the best you can do is aim to end your dynamic with no regrets. We have to realize that sometimes our tastes change, we outgrow the person we're with, or just not everything works out the way we want it to. The best we can do is to aim to have an amicable breakup. You don't want to turn it into a tit-for-tat conversation that can become very toxic very quickly. While it may be hard to end a relationship on a high note, it's far more important to do so for both parties involved. This is a major principle of the BDSM and lifestyle community. Don't out someone. You're out, loving life, enjoying the fact that everyone knows you're involved in the scene. That's great. Doesn't mean your significant other is. Don't be that person that outs them to their work colleagues, their friends, their family, as this can cause immeasurable harm to their livelihood or relationships that exist outside of yours. It's also a good way to find yourself on the outside of the community fast. Finally, don't use BDSM as a cover for your therapy. First, your partner can't consent to that, especially when you may encounter a myriad of emotions that come flooding through and you're expecting them to take care of you, and they're not your therapist. If you corner them into being that for you, you could find you're on the precipice of more issues than you started with. There are many principles out there, some more hardcore than others to follow. Well, some of the former ones that I talked about today are given within the community. Others can evolve or take on different meanings. Laying out these principles with your partners is important. It puts you both on the same page. It allows you to grow together. Otherwise, you might find out you're growing in the opposite direction. Until next time, everyone, be safe, stay kinky.